Next up, we're going to look at getting loose. We're going to take our skills that we've learned, we're going to work them over on a basic model just to apply them, to get comfortable with them, and then we'll move into our project. So I'm going to start here with a new file, and we're going to choose a tree stump. A tree stump's a good one. So we'll start off with a basic tree stump so that we can work on sculpting in some shapes, applying some color and some texture. And we don't have to take this to completion, but it is just to get us comfortable with this before we get into something that we want to try to complete more. So I'm going to start with this model, and the first thing that I want to do is I can approach this in two ways. I could start with color first and lay out color, and then that might lead me to where I'm actually going to be sculpting, or I could start with the sculpt first and then paint on top of that. So two different approaches. We'll go ahead and start with our sculpting first. And for us, we're going to be doing some bark. We're going to try to sculpt in some bark and some basic shapes. So let's just use our sculpting brush, and let's get a basic size that we want. B and left click to make that a little bit bigger, and then M if we want that stronger or weaker. And remember, we looked at our layers. Let's go ahead and add a sculpt layer in. There we go. And let's go ahead and go in, and we've got our layer. We're looking good there. Okay. Let's just rename this one to bark. And let's go ahead and subdivide this up a little bit. We want to get some good shape in here. Alright, so I'm going to select on my bark layer. I'm going to subdivide it one more time. We're about almost 500,000 polys. And then what we want to do is we just simply want to start creating some shapes. And this is where, one, you want reference. Definitely get reference. It helps you to pick out the right shapes for your object. When we sculpt in, we can see that we're a little bit high, so Control Z to go back out. And then I'm just going to bring my strength down a little bit because we don't need it quite as strong. There we go. And depending on your model, whether or not you're coming in the model, where you're digging into the model, or you're pulling out on the model, it depends on what you're trying to do. Sometimes you may get a model that has been created at the height, the thickness that it wants, where you may dig into the model on the sculpt. So it just depends on the need of that as you're working. Alright, so I'm just simply going to go in here. We've got a sculpt tool. We also have a scrape tool, and the scrape tool can give us some nice flattening shapes with some sort of hard edges. And we're just simply going to go in. We're left clicking on it. We can switch between our different brushes as we go. We can even pull our strength down even more. You'll notice with the sculpt tool that you got to go really subtle and just build on top of it. All you're doing is just kind of layering on top to build that up. With a root right in here, we're just kind of creating this sense of a root growing out from the tree here. Now we have the mirroring on. I'm going to make sure I turn that one off. It came over from the other one. There we go. So you can see how you can start to get some little ridges and some little valleys, something. You don't have to try to go too straight with it because this is an organic object. We're just laying in a stroke and laying in a stroke, and then we can layer on top of those strokes, and we're pulling it around, just following what would be the curve of that tree as well as kind of the topology, the lines going around. We can zoom in and out to see how that detail starts to look. We get a nice little ridges, little peaks and valleys there, some nice organic shape with it. And we are just using a mouse. We're just brushing over with our mouse. We could switch between the tools when we're trying to get a little bit different of a shape on there, or if we're trying to flatten some of that out, if we're trying to cut some of that in. There we go. And again, this is your chance to really dig into the tools without a complex model, because you don't really want to start with a complex model with these tools. You want to start with a very simple model so that you can get a feel for exactly what the effect is of each brush and how they work. There we go. And then even to the point that if you saw a piece that you wanted to, let's say, work over more, you could even use your grab brush and you could bend it, push it, change the shape up even with it. You don't necessarily have to leave that model the way it came, unless, of course, you're working in more of a production environment and the base model has been already reviewed and accepted. Then typically you don't want to change the form, the major form of that model up much at all. Alright. Zoom it again. And you can see the one thing that can happen is that you can really go in on one area and you can just focus in on the details in that one little area. And they can absorb a lot of your time. So you're always going to need to be able to know what is really being seen and what's not being seen, so that you focus your energy on those key areas, especially in a production environment where time is a factor. If it's something just for the fun of it and you just want to take a model and take it to some extreme amount and focus in on every little detail, then absolutely just have fun with it and take your time, because time at that point does not have an impact, but it is also nice to complete them too. So in here you can see how we're just finding some curves, finding some shapes, playing with that root sort of feel of those overgrown bark and wood as it grows out and expands, and it just kind of grows on top. And we're just using our sculpting tool simply to lay out some shapes where we can see some bark growing. And what we're going to focus on for this is actually just this one little piece. We don't want to take too much time, but I do want to set it up so that you can continue working on the rest of it. And this is to kind of get you started and get you thinking about the kinds of shapes. So in here I'm just going to paint in some basic shape for some bark. We're just painting in a nice little flat area, which of course you could use your flatten, you could use your, let's see, your foam if you wanted to, and you could set it to a certain height and pull it out for us. Our sculpt tool works just fine. It gets us set up just the way we need. Or we can come in and we can start blocking in shapes, leaving space in between, so we're looking at basically what most of modeling and even high poly sculpting and things generally are. You typically have peaks and valleys. You've got high spots and low spots, so you're always looking at making sure that you're giving yourself room for those. And you can see here we're just creating a little pattern. Now we could also use other options, like in here we've got some stamps and some stencils. Let's see if we've got something interesting in here for some bark. Now we actually have some bark in here and it has a shape. Now just to kind of show you over here how that would work, I've got my sculpting tool on and I've got my bark stencil. I'm just simply going to left click on it. When I left click, it's actually going to create the depth based on that image. And then we'll turn that off so we can see it. There we go. We get a nice level of detail. Now when we see that, we go, it's pretty good. It doesn't quite give us the bigger shapes that we're looking for, but, and we'll see this in just a minute, what it will do is it will give us a detail map on top of what we already have. Alright, so let's say that we start to get where we like what we're seeing right here. We're gonna pull some of this little top edge out. That bark starts to split off and pull away from it. Again, this is just a great spot for experimentation, for playing around with the tool set. Alright, so I'm going to flatten out and sort of scrape out that to give me an edge right in there. There we go. I'm going to hit some of these with the scraping just to give me a little bit of a tighter shape. There we go. We can start seeing how we're defining that shape right there. Now let's add another layer. So I'm going to go up and do a new layer, new sculpting layer. And we're going to call this our detail layer. Our detail layer, we're going to put some bark like that on there. We want some cool little details that we can pull out of there. Now we'll just kind of flip through. We've got some different patterns in here. We've got some reptile skin. That one might actually make a nice bark right there. And we'll kind of keep going through. That's also a nice little bark look. And some spots and things like that, and some grunge. The other ones we've got the brick and the mortar. We've got that bark one. We've got a nice little stony pattern and some wood pattern. Probably for us, and that's a nice shape right in there. I think we're going to use this one with a little spot right there. That lets us add a nice little amount of detail to it. So now, just like before, we've got our whichever tool that we want. We have our stencil selected, and then of course any options in here that we want, the visibility as we work with it, the offset, and adjusting the image. But right now we actually look pretty good. We're just going to left click on it and we're going to start to set that in there. There we go. And as it gets in there, we can just adjust it. Maybe we can pick up some of the detail from this one as well. And we can work in a little of the detail with that one. You can definitely just switch back and forth, overlap, use what you need. And of course, if you see any kind of blocking in any way, you see some that sort of pixelization almost in the model, and that's just the resolution. Simply means, add some more geometry to your model. For our needs right now, though, this will serve the purpose. But certainly, as you're working with more highly detailed models, and you need more detail, just keep on subdividing up, and you'll do just fine with it. There we go. We'll go up and around. And we might even move our model more into a direction where that projection works better, so it doesn't cast it down and stretch it out. And of course you can load in your own projection maps. So if you've got some great photos that you want to impart onto your model, you can just do your add stencil and or stamp, and that's just simply going to bring you to a window to point to a file that you want to add to the images down there. Okay, we're looking good. We'll go ahead and click off on that one, and then we can zoom back, and we can see we've started to get a lot of nice little detail. We also notice that it helps having that first layer that we put in. Had we simply done the detail, we wouldn't have gotten those nice shapes that we needed to define it. When we put the shapes in there, we really define the way this is going to look. And then when we add our detail layer, you can see how this by itself, it definitely needs more. So it's all these layers combined and working with each other that's really going to create the right amount of detail and the look that we're going for. So with that basic level of detail on there, that gives us just what we need to go back in and actually start working on some of the painting. So let's go ahead and go in. We're going to switch over to our paint mode, and I'm going to go into my new layer, and we'll put this as our base color that we're going to work with. We'll put in our diffuse channel, and I'll click OK on that one. So we've got our initial color map that we could put on here. I'm going to switch to my paint tools. I'm going to go into my paintbrush, and I'm going to choose a nice little red-brown color. Let's go for something kind of soft. There we go. And that will give me what I need. I'm going to bump my size up a little bit because I just want to paint this whole guy. Here we go. We'll just move all the way around, make sure we catch most of that object. We can take a peek at our UV map, and we can kind of see that we've got everything looks like it's covered. Alright, and I'm also going to put a new layer, but I'm going to do a specular layer because I don't really need that much highlight right now, so I'm going to take off some of the highlights. So we'll do a highlight layer, we can call it. And for this one, we're just going to tone this down a little bit with a black, because all I'm doing is taking out all of the shininess in it right now, because we are more of a natural object. It's a little more muted. It's not going to quite have that type of highlight in it. There we go. I'm going to select on my base color, and let's go ahead and just add another. We could add another layer. Our best bet is to add another layer, because we really do want to keep this as separate as possible. So for base color, sort of our mid-tone, we could do this as our darks. And for our darks, we could use our color, and we could go a little bit more in the dark, maybe even a little more in the red. There we go. And remember your shortcut keys, your B and M. We're just going to shrink this up a little bit. Now we could go in here and just kind of spot areas if we wanted to, and try to paint it in like that. We can also go in, and instead of doing that, we could just say, well, let's just do some projection painting, or using one of our stamps, and just kind of paint in some of that detail. Like, let's say something like this. Let's just try it out, see what kind of effect we get. We can see that we get a nicer edge on the side. It's not so clean cut. We could even use our randomization here, and we can see how we can get some nice little spots there. And what else could we do? We could shrink that up a little bit. We could change the strength of that, and then let's change our spacing out just a little bit more. There we go. So you can see where you could go back in. You could spot some color in, and we don't have to be too particular. We're just trying to get some areas where we want some more shadowy color. So we're going to go in, we're putting some spots in and around, and now we go, well, how can we take those spots and make those spots look just a little bit better? Well, we have some more tools that we can explore. So let's go into our blur tool. Our blur tool is a nice little tool. We can increase the size of that. There we go. And I'm going to take my stamp spacing off. So if you ever get that little bump, bump, bump feel, it's just that stamp spacing. Make sure you uncheck that one. And now you can see that we can just take those spots, blur them out nice, and gives us a nice little effect. Softens up some of that and gives us that colorization that we need. There we go. Of course, you can continue to smooth it out and blur it out however you need. And then we can kind of take that same technique and let's just go with something a little bit lighter. And we could go back to our paintbrush tool. And lighter, we're actually going to go scaling a little bit more up and down this time. Whoops, we've still got that dark color on there. Let's make sure that we change that color out. There we go. A little more on that red side. Yeah, that's nice. So we're just going to hit it with a few little spots here and there. And the one thing you may have noticed, I was just painting on my dark, so let's Control Z back out of that, just so that we can put this on a nice new layer. I'm going to make a new layer right here, and we'll do this our lights. In fact, it really is that important to go back out of the work you've done and make a new layer for it. There we go. Alright, this gives us a basic set of color to play with. And again, the same way that we did before, we just use our blur tool. Just going to blur on top of it. There we go. Okay, so with that color in there, the lights and the darks, I'm going to actually take my lights and I'm just going to pull them down a little bit. I don't want them the full strength. I just want a nice, subtle, soft color that's in there. Alright, so we can kind of start to see what does this look like, and as we take these colors off, we go, alright, these colors are actually looking good. They're adding to the detail of the object. And then probably one of the last little details that we can do with it, we may go in with a projection, and we could go back with a specular highlights. And on our specular highlights, we'll go to our stencil and our projection, and let's say we go in here and we pick up some of this bark on this one. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Now, if you want to take that down, remember it's the shift and the left middle and the right mouse to change that shape. So if you're trying to get that just right, that's all you need to do with it. Okay, so we've got our projection. We're going to scale that down just a little bit. And this is on our specular highlights, so we're actually just trying to pick up a little bit of detail on there. You'll notice that when I get to that edge, it actually paints that edge. So be careful as you're working on it and make sure you've got it just where you want it so you don't get too many hard edges. If you happen to notice one, it's probably just because you've gone to the edge of one of your stencils. There we go. We get some nice little fun little highlights this way out of it. Okay, and we'll turn that off so we can see it a little bit better. Now as we're looking at it, we can tell that it's like, wow, this is one shiny tree. Well, we can go back into our specular highlights and we can go ahead and adjust the effect that it's going to have. So let's say we just kind of take that down a little bit. There we go, somewhere nice and low. Go back to my brush. There we go. We're starting to get a really nice feel in there. And now if we want to get a better sense of the rendering of it and how it can be viewed, we'll look at our viewport filters, and we'll look at that next.